The evening air outside the restaurant was cool, and the faint sound of city traffic mixed with laughter from people walking by. Inside, the golden lights glowed softly over polished tables and sparkling glasses. The place was known for its elegance, where businessmen discussed deals, couples celebrated anniversaries, and the smell of fine food filled the air. Among the quiet bustle of waiters moving swiftly and the pianist playing a soft tune near the corner, a young woman moved carefully from table to table, holding a tray in her steady hands. Her name was Lily. She wasn't dressed in anything special, just the neat black uniform all waiters wore, but her calm face carried something deeper. Her eyes were gentle but tired. Every movement she made showed care. She wasn't new to hard work. For years, Lily had taken whatever job came her way to pay rent, support her younger brother, and keep the lights on in their small apartment. Some nights, she came home so exhausted that she could barely eat dinner, but she never complained. She had grown used to swallowing her struggles with a smile. What no one in that room knew, however, was that Lily had once dreamed of something much bigger. When she was younger, she used to play the piano for hours every day. Her mother had taught her the basics when she was a child, and Lily had taken to it as if she were born to play. Music had been her escape, her place of peace. But after her mother passed away and life became more about survival than dreams, the piano fell silent. Years passed. The sound of music she once created was replaced by the clinking of dishes and the chatter of customers. Yet even now, whenever she passed by the piano in the restaurant, her heart always paused for a moment. That night was busy. The restaurant's grand chandelier glimmered above a crowd of wealthy guests dressed in suits and glittering jewelry. The pianist played softly, creating a warm background for laughter and conversation. Lily carried a tray filled with glasses, weaving between the tables with quiet grace. She could tell just by glancing who was there to impress and who was there to relax. She wasn't interested in wealth or fame, but she noticed everything. She saw how some people smiled at her with kindness, while others looked through her as if she were invisible. It didn't bother her much anymore. She had learned that people often reveal who they truly are by how they treat those who serve them. As she cleared a table, she glanced at the piano in the corner. The musician, a middle-aged man with a calm smile, was playing a tune Lily recognized instantly. It was Claire de Lune, one of her favorites. Her mother used to hum it while cooking dinner, back when their home was filled with laughter. For a moment, Lily forgot where she was. Her hands froze over the tray and her eyes softened as she watched the pianist's fingers glide across the keys. "Lily," a voice called, snapping her back to reality. It was her manager, giving her a look that reminded her there was no time to daydream. She nodded quickly, smiled, and moved to the next table. As the evening went on, she kept herself busy, serving, smiling, and thanking guests who rarely noticed her name tag. But deep down, that melody kept playing in her mind. Like a ghost from another life she thought she had left behind. Around 8 o'clock, a group of men entered, dressed in expensive suits that instantly drew attention. The staff recognized one of them right away. He was a billionaire named Mr. Hartman, a man often seen in newspapers known for his business empire and larger-than-life personality. Wherever he went, people paid attention. He was used to being the center of every room he walked into. Lily didn't know much about him beyond what she'd overheard on the news, that he was rich, powerful, and sometimes arrogant. She didn't care much for titles. To her, he was just another customer who needed good service and a polite smile. Mr. Hartman and his guests were seated at the largest table near the front. They ordered expensive dishes and vintage wine without even looking at the menu. Their laughter filled the restaurant, loud and confident. The pianist switched to a more upbeat tune, hoping to match their mood. Lily walked over with a tray of drinks. As she placed them carefully on the table, she heard one of the guests joking, "Hartman, you could buy this whole restaurant if you wanted to." Mr. Hartman chuckled and replied, "Maybe I should, but only if they can play music that's worth listening to." His tone carried both humor and pride. The pianist smiled politely but continued playing, pretending not to hear. Lily gave a small, nervous laugh, unsure whether to respond or stay silent. Just as she was about to leave, Mr. Hartman's gaze landed on her. "You look like you've got something to say," he said, half teasing, half serious. Lily shook her head quickly. "No, sir. Just doing my job," she replied softly. But one of the men at the table pressed further. "You ever play, sweetheart? You look like someone who might know a bit about music." The question caught her off guard. She hadn't touched a piano in years. "I used to," she said quietly. The group laughed lightly, thinking she was joking. "Used to?" one of them said. "Come on, play something for us. Let's see what you've got." Lily froze, unsure how to answer. Her heart started to beat faster. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not in front of people like them. She tried to smile politely. "It's been a long time," she said. "I don't think I remember much." Mr. Hartman leaned back in his chair, watching her with mild amusement. "Everyone says that until they try," he said. "Tell you what, play one song for us, and if it's good, I'll give you a tip you won't forget." His tone was casual, but everyone at the table knew it was a challenge. The pianist stopped playing for a moment and looked at Lily with curiosity. The other diners nearby had started to notice what was happening. Whispers spread through the room. Some people smiled, eager to see what would happen next. Lily's palms were sweating. She wanted to say no. She wanted to walk away and pretend she hadn't heard, but a small voice inside her whispered something different. What if she tried? It had been so long since she'd touched a piano, but the idea stirred something in her heart. It was as if a part of her that had been asleep for years suddenly woke up. Still, she hesitated. "Sir, I really shouldn't. I'll get in trouble if I stop working," she said, hoping the conversation would end there. But her manager, overhearing the exchange, approached nervously and said, "If Mr. Hartman wants to hear you play, then by all means let him." Lily's stomach turned. There was no escaping it now. The room had gone quieter. She could feel dozens of eyes on her. The pianist stood and gestured to the bench. "Go ahead," he said kindly. "Show them what you can do." Lily walked slowly toward the piano. Each step felt heavier than the last. She could hear faint laughter behind her. Some people probably thought this would be funny, that a waitress fumbling at the piano would be good entertainment. She sat down. Her hands trembled as she placed them on her lap. The piano keys gleamed under the soft lights, waiting. For a moment, she just stared at them, remembering all the times she had played as a child. The old piano at home had been scratched and uneven, but to her it had been magic. Every note she had played had come from her heart. Now sitting there, surrounded by strangers, she felt that same heartbeat again, uncertain but alive. Mr. Hartman crossed his arms, watching. "Well," he said, "let's hear it." Lily took a deep breath. She pressed her fingers lightly on the keys, testing them. The sound was pure and clear. It reminded her of her mother's voice. She closed her eyes for a second. She didn't know what she was going to play. Her mind went blank, but her hands seemed to know on their own. Slowly, softly, she began to play the first few notes of a tune she hadn't touched in years. The sound floated gently through the air. The laughter faded. The voices grew silent. Every head turned toward her, and for the first time in a long while, Lily wasn't a waitress. She wasn't invisible. She was simply herself, a girl with music in her heart, finding her way back home through the piano keys. The sound of the first few notes floated softly through the air, almost shy at first. Lily's hands trembled slightly, but her fingers began to remember. It had been years since she had last played. Yet the moment her skin touched the ivory keys, something inside her started to come alive again. The restaurant, usually filled with laughter and the hum of conversation, grew unusually still. The guests turned their heads toward the piano, curious to see what the waitress could do. A few people whispered quietly, expecting her to make a mistake any second. Mr. Hartman leaned back in his chair. His lips curved in a half-smile that carried both amusement and doubt. But Lily didn't look at anyone. Her eyes were on the keys, her body still, her focus steady. The melody that came from her fingers was soft but full of feeling. It was not perfect, some notes were hesitant, but there was something different about it. It was honest. It came straight from the heart. As she played, memories began to flash before her eyes. Her mother's hands guiding hers when she was a little girl, the laughter in their small living room, the old piano that had missing keys but still sang beautifully under her touch. She remembered the joy she used to feel, the way she'd lose herself in the sound, forgetting everything else for the first time in years. She felt that again. The guests who had been whispering slowly quieted. Even the servers stopped moving for a moment. The only sound left was the piano. Every note Lily played seemed to fill the room with something warm and familiar. The pianist, who had been standing nearby, watched her closely. He had seen many people play before, professionals, students, performers. But there was something different about this. Her playing wasn't about showing skill or impressing anyone. It was about emotion. Lily's eyes stayed half closed as her hands glided from one chord to another. The melody grew stronger. A spark of confidence started to show. She wasn't trying to prove herself. She was remembering who she was. Mr. Hartman's smirk faded slightly as he leaned forward. The joking look on his face turned into one of quiet curiosity. The group of wealthy men at his table exchanged glances but said nothing. Something about her music demanded silence. The song went on for a few minutes, building and softening like a gentle wave. By the time she reached the last note, the air in the restaurant felt completely different. The sound lingered for a few seconds before fading away. When she lifted her hands off the keys, there was no applause. Not yet. Everyone just sat still, unsure of what to say. Then, slowly, people began to clap. It started with one person at the bar, then another, and soon the entire room filled with applause. Some smiled, some even looked touched. The pianist clapped the loudest, his face full of admiration. Lily turned red with embarrassment. She stood quickly and gave a small, nervous smile, unsure what to do next. She hadn't expected anyone to react that way. Mr. Hartman raised his glass toward her. "Well," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That was better than I expected." His tone was light, but his eyes carried a strange look, something between surprise and respect. The people around him laughed politely, but this time the laughter wasn't mocking. It was genuine. Lily gave a small bow and whispered, "Thank you," before stepping away from the piano. Her heart was still racing. Her hands felt weak. She walked back toward the service area, trying to return to work as if nothing had happened. As she passed by a few tables, some guests smiled at her. One woman said softly, "That was beautiful, dear." Another man nodded approvingly. It felt strange. She wasn't used to being noticed. Usually she moved like a shadow in the background, taking orders, cleaning tables, and fading out of sight. But now people were looking at her differently. She placed her tray on the counter and tried to calm herself down. Her friend Mia, another waitress, rushed up to her with wide eyes. "What was that?" she whispered. "You never told me you could play like that." Lily smiled shyly. "I didn't think I could anymore," she said. "Well, you can," Mia said, shaking her head. You should have seen everyone's faces. Even the big man himself looked impressed. Lily tried to laugh it off, but deep inside, something stirred, a small spark she hadn't felt in years. A few minutes later, Mr. Hartman called her back to his table. She hesitated but walked over. The billionaire leaned forward, studying her with interest. "You said it's been a long time since you played?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "I used to when I was younger." He nodded slowly. "Well, it's clear you haven't lost it." That was quite something. His friends agreed, some clapping her on the shoulder, others smiling. She didn't know what to say. Compliments from strangers, especially from people like them, felt strange and unreal. Mr. Hartman pulled out a crisp note from his wallet and placed it on the table. "For the music," he said. "And for surprising us tonight." She shook her head. "That's very kind, but I can't take that, sir. I was just doing what you asked." He raised an eyebrow. "You sure? Most people wouldn't refuse." "I'm sure," she said softly. "I didn't play for money." For a moment, Mr. Hartman didn't say anything. He looked at her as if he couldn't quite understand her. Then he smiled faintly and put the note back into his wallet. "Suit yourself," he said. "You've got something special, you know. Don't waste it." She thanked him quietly and walked away. The rest of the night passed slowly. The music from the piano resumed, but it didn't sound quite the same anymore. People kept glancing toward Lily, whispering and smiling. She did her best to stay focused on her work, but inside her mind, her thoughts were spinning. When the restaurant finally closed, she stayed back to help clean up. The lights were dimmed and the chairs were turned upside down on the tables. The pianist was packing up his sheet music when he came over to her. "You've got real talent," he said kindly. "Don't let that sleep again. It's rare to find someone who plays with heart these days." She smiled softly. "Thank you, I didn't think I still had it in me." He laughed lightly. "You never lose it. Maybe the fingers get rusty, but the music stays inside." After he left, Lily stood alone for a while looking at the piano. The smooth surface reflected the dim lights of the restaurant. She reached out and touched one of the keys, pressing it gently. A single note echoed softly in the empty room. That sound carried memories she thought were gone forever. She thought of her mother again, how she used to sit beside her, humming softly, saying, "Music is not about showing off. It's about speaking without words." Tears filled her eyes. But she quickly wiped them away. She walked home that night under the quiet city lights, her heart full of mixed feelings. The streets were nearly empty. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly on the pavement. For once, she didn't feel tired. Instead, she felt awake, alive in a way she hadn't felt for years. At home, her small apartment was dark and quiet. Her younger brother was asleep on the couch, a blanket half fallen to the floor. She covered him gently and then sat by the window. She could still feel the piano keys under her fingers, still hear the melody she had played. She whispered to herself, "Maybe it's not too late." That night, she couldn't sleep. The thought of playing again wouldn't leave her mind. She thought about finding an old piano somewhere, maybe practicing again just for herself. She didn't care about the billionaire or the applause. What mattered was that, for the first time in years, she felt connected to something she loved. But she didn't know that what happened that night had already started a ripple she couldn't see yet. Some of the guests at the restaurant had recorded her performance on their phones. A few had shared short clips online with captions like, "The waitress who played like an angel," and "Unexpected talent in a luxury restaurant." By morning, her quiet life was already beginning to change, though she had no idea yet. For now, she sat by the window, smiling softly as the first light of dawn touched the city skyline. Her heart was calm, her mind full of music. The girl who once thought her dreams were lost had found them again, hidden beneath the dust of time. And somewhere in the back of her mind she knew, this was only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight filtered gently through the curtains of Lily's small apartment. The sound of birds outside woke her, though she had hardly slept. Her mind was still full of music, her heart still racing from the night before. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes and trying to convince herself it hadn't been a dream. For a long time she had thought her gift was buried forever. But last night, sitting at that piano in front of all those people, she had felt something powerful, like a part of her soul had woken up after years of silence. She got ready for work as usual, putting on her simple uniform and tying her hair back neatly. Her brother, still half asleep, mumbled a sleepy "good morning" from the couch. She smiled, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Go back to sleep. I'll bring you something good after work." When she reached the restaurant, the atmosphere was different. People greeted her with smiles. Some of the staff whispered to each other and looked her way. Even her manager, who was usually strict and distant, gave her a small nod of respect. It didn't take long for her to understand why. One of her co-workers, Mia, rushed over holding her phone. "You need to see this," she said, almost out of breath. Lily frowned, confused. "What is it?" Mia showed her the screen. There, on a popular social media page, was a video of her sitting at the piano. The caption read, "Waitress plays piano for billionaire, leaves everyone speechless." The clip had already gathered thousands of views overnight, and comments were flooding in. Lily stared at it in shock. "Who posted this?" she whispered. "No idea," Mia said, "but it's everywhere now. People are talking about you." Her hands trembled. She didn't know whether to feel happy or terrified. She had never wanted attention. But seeing how people were reacting, how they were writing things like "this gave me chills," and true talent hiding in plain sight, it warmed her heart in a way she hadn't expected. As the day went on, more people came to the restaurant than usual. Some asked quietly if the piano waitress was working today. Others requested songs, hoping to see her play again. Her manager, seeing how much attention it brought, encouraged her to perform a short piece during the quiet hour between lunch and dinner. At first, Lily refused. "I can't, I'm not ready," she said. But later, when the room grew still and the piano stood waiting, she couldn't resist. She walked up to it slowly, sat down, and began to play. This time she wasn't nervous. She let her hands move freely, letting her heart guide the melody. The sound floated through the restaurant again, soft and beautiful. Customers listened quietly, and when she finished, they clapped warmly. That small moment gave her courage she didn't know she had. What she didn't realize was that across town, in a tall glass building with a view of the entire city, Mr. Hartman was sitting in his office watching that same video on his tablet. His assistant had shown it to him that morning. He had laughed at first, surprised that something so small had spread so fast. But as he watched, the laughter faded. The clip showed Lily sitting nervously at the piano, then slowly transforming as she played. The emotion in her music was clear even through the poor phone recording. For years, Mr. Hartman had attended galas, concerts, and charity events where professional musicians performed for him. But none of them had stirred anything inside him the way that girl's music did. There was something pure about it, something real. He replayed the video twice. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. "Find out who she is," he told his assistant. Later that week, Lily was finishing her shift when her manager approached her with a strange look on his face. "Lily," he said carefully, "Mr. Hartman's office just called. They want to meet you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Meet me, why?" "They didn't say," he replied, but it sounded important. She stood still for a long moment, unsure how to react. Part of her was afraid. The other part, the one that still remembered the warmth of the piano keys, was curious. 2 days later, she found herself standing in the lobby of a tall building downtown. The receptionist smiled and guided her to an elevator. Her palms were sweaty, her stomach in knots. When she reached the top floor, she was led into a large, quiet office with glass walls and city views stretching for miles. Mr. Hartman was there, sitting behind a desk, looking very different from how he had at the restaurant. There was no crowd around him, no laughter, no arrogance. Just a calm man who looked like he had been thinking a lot. He stood when she entered. "Lily," he said with a polite nod. "It's good to see you again." She returned the gesture nervously. "Good afternoon, sir." He smiled slightly. "You can relax. This isn't an interview or anything like that." She sat down carefully. "I wasn't sure why you wanted to see me." He folded his hands. "Because I made a mistake," he said simply. "That night when I challenged you to play, I did it for fun, for my own amusement. But you reminded me what real talent looks like, and I haven't stopped thinking about that performance since." Lily didn't know what to say. Compliments from strangers were one thing, but hearing this from someone like him felt unreal. Mr. Hartman continued, "I did some asking around. I found out that you stopped playing years ago." "Why?" She looked down. "Life happened," she said softly. "My family needed me. I couldn't afford lessons or instruments anymore." He nodded slowly, understanding. "I see, but you never forgot how to play. That kind of gift doesn't fade." There was a long silence. Then he said something that took her completely by surprise. "I want to help you," he said, "if you're willing." Her eyes widened. "Help me?" "Yes, I have connections in the music industry. People who would love to hear you play. I could sponsor your training, maybe even arrange for you to perform again. You have something rare and it shouldn't go to waste." For a moment she couldn't speak. It was too much. "I don't know, sir," she said at last. "I never thought of performing again. I don't think I belong in that world," he smiled faintly. "Neither did I once upon a time. But talent doesn't ask where you come from. It only asks whether you're brave enough to use it." She thought about his words long after she left his office. The city lights sparkled as she walked home, her heart full of mixed emotions. That night she sat at the small table in her apartment, staring at her old phone, reading more of the comments on the video. Thousands of people had watched it now. Some were from different countries, writing messages like, "This touched my soul," or "Please tell her to keep playing." It was overwhelming, but also inspiring. She whispered to herself, "Maybe, just maybe I should try." Over the next few weeks, she started visiting a small community music center after work. The piano there was old and slightly out of tune, but it didn't matter. Every time she sat down to play, she felt more alive. The other musicians there welcomed her warmly. They didn't care that she was a waitress. To them, she was one of them, a musician rediscovering her gift. Mr. Hartman visited one evening, quietly watching from the back of the room. When Lily saw him, she stopped playing mid-song, embarrassed. He smiled and said, "Don't stop. Keep going." She laughed nervously, then continued. This time she played a soft, beautiful melody that filled the small hall. When she finished, he clapped softly and said, "You belong here. Remember that." From that night, things began to change. Lily was invited to play at small local events. Each time her confidence grew. Her playing became smoother, her emotions deeper. She wasn't playing for approval anymore. She was playing because it made her feel whole again. Mr. Hartman watched her progress quietly, helping behind the scenes but never taking credit. It wasn't about business for him anymore. It was about giving someone the chance he wished someone had given him when he was young. And as for Lily, she began to realize that what had started as a challenge, a moment meant to embarrass her, had become the turning point of her life. The girl who once hid behind trays and polite smiles now sat proudly at the piano, filling rooms with music that could touch hearts and silence even the loudest voices. She still worked at the restaurant sometimes, not because she had to, but because she liked to stay grounded, and whenever she passed by that same piano in the corner, she would smile softly. It was the place where everything had changed. The night when a cruel joke turned into a miracle. The night when a waitress reminded a billionaire and herself that true beauty doesn't come from money or fame. It comes from the soul. And though she didn't know what the future held, one thing was certain: she would never stop playing again. The sound of applause echoed softly in the small community hall. Lily lifted her hands from the piano and smiled shyly as the last note faded. It was her third time performing there, and although it wasn't a grand stage, to her it felt more meaningful than any luxury event could ever be. The people who came to listen weren't rich or famous. They were ordinary folks, workers, students, and neighbors who simply loved music. They clapped warmly, not because she was perfect, but because she made them feel something real. That was what mattered to her most. After the show ended, she stayed behind for a while, wiping the piano keys gently with a cloth. It was a small gesture of care, something she had done since she was a child. Her heart still raced after every performance, but now it was from excitement rather than fear. Playing no longer felt like a dream that had slipped away. It felt like a piece of her that had finally come home. As she packed her things, she noticed Mr. Hartman standing near the door. He didn't draw attention to himself, just waited quietly until the crowd had thinned. When she walked over, he smiled. "You keep getting better," he said. She laughed softly. "I still make mistakes. We all do," he replied. "But the way you play, people don't notice the mistakes. They just listen." He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a letter of invitation to a private charity gala, one hosted by his company. "We're raising funds for a children's music program," he explained. "I'd like you to perform there. It's a formal event, but don't let that worry you. Just do what you always do, play from the heart." Her eyes widened. "Me at your gala?" He nodded. "Yes, I could hire any pianist, but I'd rather have someone who reminds people why music matters. You've got that gift." She hesitated, unsure. The thought of playing in front of wealthy guests again made her nervous. "I don't know if I belong at an event like that," she said. He smiled kindly. "You didn't think you belonged the last time either." And look how that turned out. His words made her laugh, and she finally agreed. The following week, she prepared carefully. She practiced every evening after work, her fingers moving across the keys until the notes felt like second nature. The music center staff encouraged her, and even the restaurant manager gave her time off, proud that one of his own was doing something special. When the night of the gala arrived, Lily stood in front of the mirror in a simple but elegant dress that a friend had lent her. She hardly recognized herself. The girl who once served tables now looked like someone who was about to step onto a stage. The event was held in a grand ballroom filled with soft lights, chandeliers, and polished floors that reflected the glow. People in fine clothes mingled, chatting over glasses of sparkling drinks. At one end of the room stood a grand piano, black, shining, and beautiful. Lily arrived early, her heart pounding. She walked over to the piano, touched the keys lightly, and closed her eyes. "Just breathe," she whispered to herself. When the program began, Mr. Hartman gave a short speech about the charity's goal: to give underprivileged children access to music lessons. Then he introduced Lily. "She's someone who reminds us that real talent can be found anywhere, even in the most unexpected places," he said. The room filled with polite applause as she walked to the piano. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but she tried not to look up. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first few notes were gentle and slow, like a soft whisper in a crowded room. As she continued, the melody grew richer, more emotional. It carried the story of her life, the struggles, the quiet dreams, the rediscovery of hope. The audience listened in silence. Some closed their eyes. Some leaned forward, drawn in by the way her fingers seemed to speak without words. Even those who didn't know music could feel it. The sincerity, the honesty, the beauty in every sound. Mr. Hartman watched from the side of the stage. He had seen countless performances before, but this was different. There was something in her music that reminded him why he had started his business years ago. Not for power or fame, but for purpose. When the last note faded, the ballroom remained quiet for a few long seconds. Then slowly the applause began, soft at first, then louder until the whole room was on its feet. Lily looked up in disbelief. She had never seen so many people clapping just for her. Tears filled her eyes and she smiled shyly, bowing her head. Afterward, people came up to her offering kind words and shaking her hand. A music producer who had been among the guests approached her and said, "You've got something rare. You play like someone who's lived 1,000 stories." She thanked him politely but didn't say much. She wasn't sure what to make of the attention. She still felt like the same girl who served tables and wiped dishes every night. Later, when the crowd thinned out, Mr. Hartman came over. "You did wonderfully," he said. "I could tell they were moved." She smiled softly. "I was so nervous I thought I'd forget everything." He chuckled. "You didn't. And even if you had, I think they'd still be listening." He then looked thoughtful for a moment before saying, "There's something I wanted to tell you. I wasn't always rich, you know. I grew up in a small town. My father worked in a factory. We didn't have much, but my mother used to sing while cooking. I think that's where I learned to love music." She looked at him, surprised. It was hard to imagine a man like him coming from such simple beginnings. He continued, "When I built my company, I got so caught up in money and success that I forgot those simple joys. But that night at the restaurant, you reminded me of them." His honesty touched her deeply. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means a lot." Over the next few weeks, Lily's life began to change again. The video from the gala spread online, just like the first one. People around the world began sharing it, calling her the waitress who played from the soul. Reporters came to the restaurant asking for interviews, but she turned most of them down. She didn't like fame. All she wanted was to keep playing and to inspire others who had once given up on their dreams. One day, while she was practicing at the music center, a group of children came in, carrying small notebooks. They had seen her video and wanted to learn how to play like her. Their excitement reminded her of herself as a little girl. She smiled warmly and said, "You don't have to play like me. You just have to play like you." She began helping them, showing them how to find rhythm, how to feel the music rather than chase perfection. Teaching them became her favorite part of the week. Mr. Hartman later decided to fund a scholarship in her name, the Lily Music Foundation, dedicated to giving free piano lessons to children from low-income families. When he told her, she was speechless. "I don't deserve that," she said. He smiled. "You do. You've inspired people without even trying. That's worth more than any donation I could make." The grand opening of the program took place a few months later. Lily performed again, but this time it wasn't for the rich or powerful. It was for the children. They sat on the floor in front of her, eyes wide with wonder as her fingers danced over the keys. After she finished, one little girl ran up and hugged her, saying, "I want to play like you one day." Lily bent down, smiling softly. "You will," she said. "Just never stop believing in yourself." As she stood there, surrounded by the sound of laughter and the faint echo of piano notes, she realized something important. Her journey hadn't just changed her life, it had started to change others too. That night, as she walked home under the streetlights, she thought about how far she had come. From a waitress serving tables to a musician who inspired hearts. From being challenged as a joke to becoming a voice of hope for so many. She stopped by the old restaurant on her way home. Through the window, she saw another waitress wiping tables and the same piano standing quietly in the corner. For a moment, she smiled. That piano had started everything. She whispered softly, "Thank you," before walking away into the cool night air. And though she didn't know what the future would bring next, one thing was certain. Music had brought her back to life, and she would keep sharing that gift one song at a time. The morning sunlight spilled softly into Lily's small apartment, painting the walls with a golden glow. On the table sat a few scattered sheets of music, a steaming cup of tea, and her old notebook filled with song ideas. She had been up late the previous night, practicing until her fingers felt sore, yet her heart was full. For the first time in years, she woke up with purpose every morning. She still worked at the restaurant part-time, not because she needed to, but because it kept her grounded. The staff had become like family, and the place held too many memories to leave behind. Sometimes when the dinner rush slowed down, she would quietly play a few notes on the piano tucked in the corner. Customers would smile, some recording short clips on their phones, and she would laugh shyly, still unused to the attention. Her story had spread far beyond her city. Videos of her performances had reached millions of people online. Strangers sent her messages, telling her how her music gave them strength, how it helped them through sadness or reminded them of lost dreams. She read every message with tears in her eyes. She couldn't believe that something as simple as playing the piano could touch so many hearts. But fame was never her goal. She didn't chase interviews or endorsements. Instead, she focused on the little things, teaching the children at the music center, helping them learn their first melodies, encouraging them when they got frustrated. She saw herself in those children, the same spark, the same hope hidden behind shy smiles. Every afternoon, she'd sit with them, guiding their small hands over the keys. "Don't worry about being perfect," she'd say. "Music isn't about getting every note right. It's about telling a story, your story." The kids loved her. They called her Miss Lily and always wanted to show her what they'd learned. One Friday evening, as she finished class, Mr. Hartman walked in. He looked more relaxed than usual, wearing a simple coat instead of his usual formal suit. The children ran up to him cheerfully. He had become a familiar face, often visiting to see how things were going. "You're becoming quite the teacher," he said, smiling. She laughed softly. "I'm learning more from them than they are from me." He looked around at the small music room filled with laughter and piano notes. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "we're planning something special next month. It's the anniversary of the charity program. I was wondering if you'd perform again, this time with the children." Her eyes lit up. "With them?" "Yes," he nodded. "I want people to see what this program has done. You've given them something precious, a reason to dream. I think that deserves to be celebrated." She hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Of course. It would be an honor." The following weeks were busy but joyful. She and the children practiced together every day after school. Some of them were still beginners, but they tried their best, and their enthusiasm made every mistake feel unimportant. They decided to perform a simple piece, a song she had written herself, inspired by their laughter and hope. It wasn't complicated, but it was full of feeling. She called it Little Lights. The children loved the title. "Because we're your little lights," one of them said proudly, making everyone laugh. As the performance day approached, the excitement grew. The event was set in the same grand hall where she had once played for the first time in front of the wealthy crowd. But this time things felt different. She wasn't a nervous waitress being challenged. She was a musician, a teacher, walking in with her students by her side. When they arrived at the hall, the children stared in amazement at the chandeliers and polished floors. "It's so shiny," one of them whispered, their eyes wide. Lily knelt down beside them and said gently, "Don't worry about the lights or the crowd. Just focus on the music. Play like we do in class." The room slowly filled with guests, donors, parents, and many people who had followed Lily's story. Mr. Hartman took the stage to give a short speech. He spoke about how far they had come, about how one act of kindness and one moment of courage had grown into a movement that changed lives. Then he turned to Lily and said, "And it all began with one song." The audience clapped warmly as Lily and the children walked to the piano. She sat down at the center, with 4 of her students gathered around smaller keyboards arranged nearby. The moment felt surreal. She glanced at Mr. Hartman, who nodded reassuringly. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft and tender like a lullaby. The children followed her lead, their small hands pressing the keys with care. The sound was imperfect yet beautiful, like tiny stars flickering in a quiet night sky. Together, they filled the hall with simple joy. As the song continued, Lily's heart swelled with emotion. She remembered her own journey, the days of exhaustion, the humiliation, the rediscovery, and the kindness that had lifted her up when she had almost given up. Each note carried a piece of that story, woven together with the laughter of her students. By the time the final chord faded, the hall had gone silent. The audience sat still, touched in a way that words couldn't describe. It wasn't a professional performance, but it was pure, honest, and full of life. Then came the applause, strong and heartfelt. The children smiled shyly, some hiding behind Lily, others waving proudly. She stood holding their hands and bowed. Tears glistened in her eyes, but they were tears of joy. After the event, guests came forward to congratulate her. Many donated more to the music program, inspired by what they had seen. A few reporters asked for interviews again, but she politely declined. "Let the story be about them," she said, glancing at the children. "They're the real stars tonight." Mr. Hartman approached her later that evening. "You've done something remarkable," he said softly. "You've turned one small act of courage into something that's lighting up lives." She smiled. "You gave me the chance. I just tried not to waste it." He shook his head. "You earned every bit of it." That night, after everyone left, Lily stayed behind in the empty hall. The lights were dimmed and the only sound was the faint hum of the air. She sat at the piano again, letting her fingers glide over the keys without thinking. A gentle melody filled the quiet space, something new, something peaceful. As she played, she thought about her journey. She remembered the first night at the restaurant, the laughter when the billionaire challenged her, the silence that followed her first song, and how everything changed from that moment on. Back then, she thought that night was the most important one of her life, but now she realized it wasn't just that performance. It was what came after, the courage to keep playing, the kindness that spread from one person to another, the way music connected people who would have never met otherwise. When she finished, she sat quietly, her eyes closed. She felt grateful for every struggle, every tear, and every person who believed in her. The next morning, she visited the small park near her apartment. The sun was warm, and the sounds of children playing filled the air. She sat on a bench watching them laugh and chase each other, and for a moment she just listened, to life itself, to the rhythm of the world. A few of her students spotted her and ran over. "Miss Lily!" We saw the video. Everyone loved it. One shouted excitedly. She laughed. "I'm glad. You all did amazing." One of them, a quiet boy who used to be too shy to play in front of anyone, looked up at her and said, "When I grow up, I want to teach music too." Her eyes softened. "You will," she said, "and you'll be even better than me." The boy grinned proudly before running back to his friends. As she watched them, Lily realized that her purpose wasn't just to perform. It was to pass the light forward, to help others believe that even small dreams could grow into something beautiful. That night, she sat at her piano at home, opened her notebook, and began writing again. Not just music this time, but her story. She wanted others to know that even when life pushes you down, even when people doubt you, there's always something inside that can rise again. Her pen moved slowly across the page. The words came naturally, honest and simple, just like her music. And somewhere, in another part of the city, a young woman who had seen her video sat down at an old, dusty piano and placed her hands on the keys for the first time in years. Without realizing it, Lily had started a quiet chain of hope. The city was quiet that evening, painted in shades of gold as the sun began to set behind the tall buildings. From her small apartment window, Lily could see the busy streets below, people rushing home, the sound of laughter and car horns mixing in the cool air. She sat by the window with a cup of tea in her hands, watching life move, thinking about how much had changed in just 1 year. It still amazed her how one unexpected moment could change everything. That night when she was challenged to play the piano had felt like a cruel joke at first. She remembered the laughter, the stares, the pressure. But now, looking back, she realized that moment was a turning point. Not just in her life, but in how she saw herself. Her days were now filled with music, teaching, and joy. The children she mentored had grown so much. Some could now play entire songs without any help. Every time she watched them perform, she felt the same warmth that once filled her heart when she rediscovered her own music. It was as if their happiness had become her own. Still, there were days when she struggled, days when the pressure felt heavy, or when she doubted if she was really good enough to deserve the attention she got. But whenever she felt lost, she would sit at the piano, close her eyes, and let the sound remind her of who she was. Music had saved her once. Now it kept her steady. One afternoon, as she was teaching a small group of students, a letter arrived. It was from an international music organization, inviting her to perform at a cultural festival in another country. They had seen her video online and wanted her to represent her foundation by performing a special piece with children from different nations. At first, she couldn't believe it. She read the letter twice, then looked at Mr. Hartman, who was visiting that day. He smiled proudly. "Looks like your music has traveled farther than you ever imagined," he said. She hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready for something that big." He shook his head. "You've already done something bigger. You changed lives. This is just another step." After some thought, she agreed. The children were thrilled when she told them. "You're going to play for the world," one of them shouted, jumping up and down. She laughed and hugged them all, promising to make them proud. The following weeks were busy with preparations. She composed a new piece, something that combined the innocence of childhood with the hope of new beginnings. She named it The Promise. It was soft, emotional, and full of warmth. When the day finally arrived, Lily boarded the plane with quiet excitement. She had never traveled so far before. As she looked out the window, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a quiet waitress serving tables to a musician about to perform on an international stage. The festival was held in a grand open-air auditorium surrounded by nature. Musicians from around the world had gathered, each with their own instruments and stories. But what touched her most was seeing the group of children she would be performing with, from different countries, speaking different languages, yet all connected by the same love for music. During rehearsals, they laughed and learned from one another. Even though they didn't share the same words, they understood each other through melody and rhythm. Lily often caught herself smiling as she watched them play, realizing that music truly spoke a universal language. The night of the performance came quickly. The audience filled the seats under the starlit sky, the air buzzing with anticipation. Lily felt her heart race, but it wasn't fear. It was gratitude. She walked onto the stage, the spotlight warm on her face. The children seated beside her, their small fingers ready on the keys. She took a deep breath and began. The first notes of The Promise floated into the night air, gentle, graceful, and full of emotion. The children joined in, their harmonies blending beautifully with her melody. The sound grew like a wave, soft but powerful, simple but moving. As she played, she thought about all the faces that had been part of her journey. The kind co-workers at the restaurant, the strangers who encouraged her, Mr. Hartman who believed in her, and the countless people who had listened and found comfort in her music. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore. She was playing for them, for everyone who had ever been overlooked, for everyone who had a dream they were too scared to follow. When the final note rang out, the world seemed to pause. The audience sat still, their eyes glistening. The night was filled with silence. That same kind of silence she had once experienced in the restaurant when everything changed. Then, as if waking from a dream, the crowd erupted into applause. The children smiled, their faces glowing with pride. Lily stood, bowed gently, and felt tears fall down her cheeks. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about connection, the kind that comes from sharing something pure and honest. After the show, as people congratulated her, a reporter asked, "What do you think made your story so special?" She paused for a moment and said softly, "Maybe because it's not just my story. It's everyone's story. Everyone has something beautiful inside them. Sometimes it just needs a little push to come out." Her words spread quickly online, touching even more hearts. Messages poured in from people across the world, from young musicians, from workers, from those who had once given up on their dreams. They thanked her for reminding them that it's never too late to begin again. When she returned home, the children and staff at the music center threw a small celebration. There were flowers, laughter, and homemade cupcakes. One of the kids presented her with a hand-drawn picture of her sitting at the piano, surrounded by stars. Written at the bottom were the words, "Thank you for believing in us." She held the picture close, her eyes warm with emotion. "No," she said softly, "thank you for reminding me what believing really means." Later that night, when the celebration was over, she walked alone to the nearby park. The air was cool, the moon bright above her. She sat on a bench, closed her eyes, and listened to the faint sounds of the city, footsteps, laughter, distant music. It reminded her of how far she had come. The girl who once doubted herself had found strength in her own heart. The challenge that once embarrassed her had become the beginning of her purpose. As she sat there, she thought of all the small miracles that had carried her here, not grand or loud, but quiet moments of kindness, courage, and hope. She smiled to herself and whispered, "It was all worth it." In the days that followed, she continued teaching and performing, but she also began writing her story into a small book. She wanted people to know the truth, that behind every song there was struggle, fear, and perseverance. She wanted to show that greatness doesn't come from fame or wealth, but from believing in something good when no one else does. Years later, her students grew up and went on to do wonderful things. Some became teachers like her. Some became performers. Some simply carried music in their hearts wherever they went, and in every melody they played, there was a trace of her influence, gentle, patient, and full of warmth. Mr. Hartman eventually retired, but he often visited the center, smiling as he listened to the children play. It all started with one challenge, he would say, and look what it became. And every time Lily would smile and reply, "Sometimes the hardest moments lead us to where we're meant to be." On quiet evenings, she still played alone, just for herself. She didn't need applause or cameras anymore. The piano had become her friend, a reminder of every joy, every pain, every lesson life had given her. And whenever her fingers touched the keys, it felt like coming home.